Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Food and Water Watch's November Livable Future Live. Today, we will be focusing on food access, food policy, and profiteering off the nation's food crisis. My name is Jeanine Scheffert, and I will be your host this evening. Thank you so much for being here. As people are joining, please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to see your name, where you're joining us from, and what brings you here today. For any of you new to Food and Water Watch, welcome. We are a national organization fighting for safe food, clean water, and a livable climate for all. We organize for grassroots activism at all levels of government, local, state, and federal, and we work to create the change and the solutions that we need. For any of you new to Livable Future Live, welcome. This is our virtual education series. Each month, we focus on a different topic relative to our livable future. Today, we'll be talking with Food and Water Watch Research Director Amanda Starbuck, Senior Food Policy Analyst Rebecca Wolf, and special guests Krissy Kasserman and Sudeshna das Menezes, discussing food access, research policy, and profiteering of the nation's food crisis. Next month, on Wednesday, December 10th, we'll be featuring impactful stories from from a few frontline volunteers. And in the new year, we'll be featuring Food and Water Watch Executive Director Winona Howder and Judith Enck, author of Winona's book of the year, The Problem with Plastics. I hope you'll join us for both events, and we'll put the link in the chat for those events. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are coming together in community today with a diverse set of backgrounds, perspectives, and experiences, but with a common belief in the importance of fighting for clean water, clean food, and a livable future for all. As you share your thoughts and questions in the comments, please make sure to keep them respectful. We do have someone monitoring the chat, and we'll ask anyone not abiding by this request to leave the event. A few quick notes about Zoom before we get started. If you'd like to turn on closed captioning to add subtitles to your screen, click Show Captions in your Zoom toolbar. We'll add instructions for that in the chat as well. Please use this chat box throughout the afternoon to share your thoughts and your reactions to what you're hearing. The chat is also where we will share information and links, so keep an eye out for those. And as you'll see in this slide, there is a separate icon to click for typing questions that you want to ask today's speakers. So the chat box is for talking to other attendees and sharing and receiving information, and the Q&A box is to ask questions directly to our speakers. And we have set aside time near the end for audience Q&A. And finally, I am recording this event, and I will share the recording with you in an email that I will send out tomorrow. Today, we'll be talking about how food policy shapes food access across the country. Here at Food and Water Watch, we work every day to affect policy, research those policy effects, and fight for people's rights to clean and healthy food. This is such an important part of our work and an integral part of living in a world where we're all taking care of one another. If you're able to financially support the work we're doing, please consider making a donation today. It really is people like you on this call who make a difference and who help make this work happen. Everything you give helps us do the work we're doing. We don't take any corporate funding. Our only interests lie in the health of our communities and our planet. Thank you so much for your generosity. One of the things that we'll be talking about today is the importance of food access. This topic feels personal, maybe to all of us. Food is an immediate need that every one of us needs every day. But as we all know, not everyone has easy access to food, and millions of people across the country rely on food assistance programs that have been under threat. My colleague Krissy Kasserman was unable to join us this afternoon, but she created this video that I want to share with you. Krissy is Food and Water Watch's Factory Farm Organizing Director, but in this video, she's sharing a personal message. Let's take a look.
My name's Krissy Kasserman. I'm Food and Water Watch's Factory Farm Organizing Director. My daughter was born when I was in college. I was waiting tables full-time and going to college full-time. A young, broke, single mom. Having a baby when you're in college is not an easy thing, but it had really never occurred to me to step away from school. I was really determined to finish. I was really struggling. There were a lot of days when I would rely on the one free meal that I got on my shift at the restaurant to feed myself so that I could save money to put food on my daughter's plate, which, of course is what we do as parents, but it's certainly not an easy way to live. There were a lot of nights where I laid awake wondering how far I was going to be able to stretch the little money in my checking account and whether we were going to make it through the week or the month or certainly the semester. There are a lot of other kids out there who are in the same boat that my daughter was in. They have parents who go to work all day, every day, but don't earn enough to pay the bills and to put food on the table. I was relaying all of this to a friend at some point, and she said, "Do you know about the WIC program?" And I said, "Nope, sure don't. What is the WIC program?" And she explained it to me, I think the same day I applied. And literally within days was receiving benefits. You can only spend it on staples. And so milk, juice, vegetables, cheese, those sorts of things. But suddenly the fridge was stocked, and honestly, the load off my mind, probably the biggest benefit, not worrying about how I was gonna buy groceries the very next day to be able to put food on the table for my daughter. I really do credit this program with my ability to stay in school and finish my degree. This program is such an important supplement for kids who otherwise might not have any options, who otherwise might go to bed hungry. This is a really immediate issue for a lot of families. Now, as a recent college graduate, she is thriving. She has work that she loves, doing so well, and I really do, again, credit this program with getting her such a solid start in life and helping me to finish my degree, which has allowed me to get to where I am. The advocacy work that we're doing to try and save this program and to save benefits for these kids who need them so desperately is incredibly important.
Thank you so much, Krissy, for sharing your story with us. So many of us have faced food insecurity in our lives, and having food assistance programs like WIC and SNAP during those times can be key in getting us through and getting our families through. As we've said, there have been threats to programs like this coming from multiple angles, and we'll talk more about those threats in a minute. But I also want to address the fact that more and more people are facing hunger, and the need for food assistance programs is currently increasing. Our second guest today is Sudeshna das Menezes from Henrico Community Food Bank in Henrico County, Virginia. Sudeshna, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So Sudeshna founded the Henrico Community Food Bank and has built the organization up over the last few years to feed a huge percentage of the food insecure population in her county. Sudeshna, tell us a little bit about Henrico Community Food Bank. How did the food bank come to be, and who is it that you serve?
It's a really interesting story about how it started. There wasn't any kind of premeditated, planned, thought behind it. Quite honestly, it really came about right around COVID, actually, and we were seeing really high levels of food insecurity in Henrico in particular. And it started literally as a kitchen table idea with a group of friends. And before we knew it, we went down the rabbit hole of doing a case study, sharing it with the county government. And unknown to us, of course, we were nowhere connected to what was going on the ground. But the county was throughout COVID. And that really was how the organization came about. By the time we collected all the information, we realized what we saw on the ground was really a mimic of what was written in the case study. It was kind of a foregone conclusion that something needed to be done, and something needed to be done now before things kind of went a little out of control. So that's really how we started. It was really intended and is still intended to be a very, very grassroots effort to ensuring that our county residents have the assistance they need. So in that, we very clearly made a distinction in how we were going to serve. And it's anyone and everyone who's in the county. And our goal as an organization was to really break down the barriers to access, to food access in particular, without putting those many different conditions that we might have in terms of income, in terms of residency, you name it, you make more money or you get SNAP benefits, or maybe you're going to yet another pantry, because we feel like all of those don't really factor in when you are food insecure. You know, 1 week of you going to another pantry wouldn't really make a difference, and because food insecurity is one of the single biggest issues that you have ongoing. It's day in and day out. It's multiple meals that you're having to worry about.
Right. And in our conversations, we've talked a lot about, of course, you're representing one county of the thousands of counties in the US, but I think we're, seeing this as a country all over. And your food bank has now been operating for, is it 4 years? Is that correct?
We just stepped into our 5th year of operation.
And what have you seen in terms of community need within that time frame?
I think the single biggest thing is just the fact that the need is growing. I think what is unique in our county is there's been a huge migration of population from the city, and they are kind of moving to Henrico, which obviously adds to many different stressors. So the need is growing, and this is not just it just blew up in the last 2 months. It's something that we have seen progressively. And of course, as our name is more out in the public, as more people share our story and, our resources, but we haven't seen the need go down. I think it's been interesting to see who needs the help, and it's not necessarily who we think. We have a lot of our households are seniors. Living on very, very fixed incomes, and really with not a whole lot of leeway to make things any different. You're choosing between medication or you're choosing between food. Neither of those really are a choice you need to make. Yeah. We have families, we have single moms for sure. We have, working households where both parents are working. The working poor is a very legitimate concern, where you are both working, you still don't make enough to meet the needs of a household. We certainly have a significant immigrant population here, so we do see them reaching out to us as well. So it's single adults. We have young adults who have lost jobs, and they need that helping hand just till the time they get the next paycheck, till they find the next job. So we are basically, it's overwhelming sometimes, I feel, to see the need and to see it growing. And I'm so glad that we are in this space where we are able to be of assistance, whichever little way we can, for our county residents.
Sorry, I started coughing right there. So we're seeing more and more people in need of food assistance. Yeah, this past spring, so sorry, there were cuts to food assistance programs. How did that affect your food bank?
Oh my goodness. We are very small, 2 full-time, 2 part-time office, basically. And I think our model in itself poses a lot of logistical challenges. We are the only mobile food delivery service, different from Meals on Wheels. But when you have something like this happen, which we knew, we were expecting, obviously, but it's overwhelming for a staff that's that small. But obviously a lot of things kind of got pushed to the background, but our immediate focus really was, how do we reach back out to these people in the best possible time frame, so they know they've reached somebody. It's not like an email that's going around in cyberspace somewhere, or a text message that I don't know where that went. But it definitely was overwhelming. But I think in a way, there was so many resources, so many different ways people got our information, and we were one of the many. Obviously, we're not the only food pantry, food bank in town, but there was such a huge influx of how you could reach different people. I think that was the plus. It allowed folks during this time to actually, it was easy access. There was a phone number that was right there. No one had to search on Google. And I think that was huge and very significant, especially for our older population. I think the other part was, because it was such a nationwide issue, I feel the stigma and the taboo attached to SNAP and programs like this really was lifted, and it was just commonplace discussion, which allowed folks who otherwise would never have reached out to us to reach out. So I feel like it had, while it was obviously extremely disheartening for a lot of folks, it was also, there were silver linings, at least to, how I see it, because people actually now are able to access far more readily and connect with those agencies. Like I said, otherwise they probably wouldn't have.
Yeah.
So it was exponential increase for us. We already served over 550 some households on a monthly basis. We jumped like 100, 100 more. And for smaller organizations like us, that's multiple layers of stresses on, your funding, your food, making sure that you get routed, making sure you have volunteers who are, so it's operationally, it was very significant. I do think it has calmed down a little bit, but again, because our name is out there so much more, we continue to see, on a daily basis, many calls that otherwise we probably wouldn't have received.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such an important service to be able to offer. We have a number of people online here today and who will be watching this recording as well. Is there anything more that you'd like to share before we sign off and start talking about our research?
Sure. I mean, I think we are not unique in what we do. There are thousands and thousands of pantries and food banks throughout the country, and we are all kind of in the same boat, experiencing the same, multiple levels of stresses. I think for anyone who is inclined to assist, I would say check in with your local feet on the ground organizations. Reach out to them to ask what it is they need that particular moment, because the needs change on a weekly basis, sometimes on a daily basis. It might be, I need more food now, but tomorrow I need to purchase food, so I need funding. I think that's probably one of the best ways to actually really make that kind of grassroots level impact, is reaching out to those organizations that really are on the ground, who are, reaching out to those folks in their counties, in their neighborhoods.
Yeah, thank you. Gosh, it feels like such a short amount of time to talk about something so important, but thank you so much for joining us today, Sudeshna, and for all the work that you do to support your community.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us. We appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll all get through this as well.
Thank you so much. If you want to learn more about the work of Henrico Community Food Bank, we will put a link in the chat now. And I encourage everyone listening to check them out. And also, as Sudeshna said, to learn about the food pantry or food bank closest to you. Ask them what resources they need if you're in a position to help give resources. And if you're in a position where you are looking for food for yourself or your family, make sure to check them out as well. Food banks like this are an incredibly important way that we can all take care of one another. Thank you again, Sudeshna. Next up, I'd like to introduce my colleague Amanda Starbuck. Amanda is Food and Water Watch's Research Director, and today she is going to share her research, give us some facts and figures, and share the big picture of what is happening here. Why are grocery prices so high? Who is in charge of this system? Who is profiting from it? And how are they getting away with it? Amanda, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm just gonna start with a little story. So when my mom was a child, her grandparents, my great-grandparents, they owned the only grocery store in a small little town called Alexander, North Dakota. It's a town that most of you probably haven't heard of, at least not until the fracking boom really took her home area to national attention. But like many small towns in the 1950s and 60s, it had a dependable grocery store. My great-grandparents sold the store at retirement, but by the time I came around, it was still there. And as kids, when visiting my grandparents in Alexander, we would beg our parents for pocket change to go visit the store and buy some snacks. A lot of family tales revolve around this store as well. When I look at that sloped awning in the front there, I recall the story of when my grandparents couldn't find my aunt, who was 2 years old at the time, until a customer walked in the store and said, "Did you know that Lenore is sitting on the roof up there?" But by the time I left college, grocery store was gone, replaced by a bar. I don't think it's the same bar in this picture here. I think it's changed hands a few times since then. And the building next to this now bar was another bar, and a third bar had taken place in the basement of the town's cafe. The town's population hadn't really changed in this time, still hovering around 200 people. But that small independent grocery store, like so many others in rural America, faced competition from a new entity moving in, Walmart. Williston, which is about 20 miles north of Alexander, got its first super Walmart, which sold groceries at prices below which smaller stores could compete. We'll talk more about that later. But people began shopping at Walmart. Maybe they started just picking up groceries when they happened to be in the town running errands. Others might have made the trip just for the lower prices and the greater selection. But whatever the reason, Alexander's store could no longer keep open. So now residents of Alexander have no choice but to do pretty much all of their shopping at nearby Williston or Watford City. And the town lost a center of community and connection and gained yet another bar. And why am I telling you this story? Because if you're from a rural community, perhaps it resonates with you. Actually, even if you live in urban areas, you might relate to the closure of small independent stores. This means that you now must travel farther and farther just to get your basic groceries. According to the US Department of Agriculture, about 17% of Americans live in low-income areas with limited food access. And this means that if you're in a city, you don't have access to a grocery store within walking distance, or if you're in a rural area, you can't get to one within 10 miles of your home. Walmart didn't start selling groceries until the late 1980s, when it opened its first supercenter. Today, however, Walmart alone captures around 2 out of every $5 spent on groceries in the United States. That's 40% of the grocery market. Walmart achieved this by undercutting its competition. Research has shown that Walmart might, for instance, lower the cost of toothpaste below what it paid for it, essentially taking a loss, just to lure customers in the door and away from competing stores. Then, when those stores went belly up, Walmart could then raise its prices back up. Today, Walmart has leverage over its distributors. Those are the companies supplying its food and retail products, because in many markets, it is the largest buyer. And this lets Walmart secure deep discounts. This means that a competing store might pay more for the same product from a distributor than Walmart can sell it for in store, making competition impossible. And together with the other leading grocery retailers in the US, Costco, Kroger, and Albertsons, these 4 companies take in 3/4 of all US grocery sales. This is a full 13 percentage points higher than when we calculated these figures just 5 years ago. Those figures reflect 2019, right before the start of the pandemic, and these figures here represent 2024. And it seems like the power of the top 4 grocery stores only got greater following the COVID-19 pandemic, whether or not the pandemic itself played into that. And keep in mind that these are national statistics. Not every town has Walmart and Albertsons, which is also known as Safeway, or Kroger, also known as King Soopers, not to mention Costco. In some communities, the share of a company like Walmart might be as high as 95%. And before I leave the other grocers off the hook, the other players in the supermarket industry have their own ways of increasing their market share. Walmart did this by undercutting competition and gaining so much market power that it can strong arm its distributors to give it sweetheart deals, meaning that others in the system might pay more than Walmart for the same products. Kroger and Albertsons got larger by mergers and acquisitions. Here we see that Kroger began in 1883 and a full 100 years later acquired Dillon's and the 3 stores that Dillon had already acquired. Fast forward to today, and Kroger is now the largest traditional supermarket chain. It controls about 13.5% of the grocery market. Walmart and Costco's food sales are still larger, but Kroger remains the largest traditional supermarket. And Kroger, which is number 3, and Albertsons number 4 in terms of top grocery retailers, they recently tried to merge, which would have worsened this problem of consolidation. Mergers can also result in stores closing, workers being laid off, and prices rising when competition is eliminated. For instance, in my current town, the only supermarket chains really are King Soopers and Safeway, which are both Kroger and Albertson brands. And the merger of their parent companies would have flattened competition. But thankfully, on December 2024, the Federal Trade Commission under Biden blocked the proposed Kroger-Albertsons merger. So when these retailers become more powerful, they can take additional steps to reduce their labor costs and increase the profits for the corporation themselves. So you see this in many ways, in the rise of self-checkout aisles, for instance, but also in cutting staff hours and reducing their access to benefits. In fact, grocery store wages remain so dismally low that many full-time workers still rely on public assistance like SNAP, which is formerly known as food stamps, and Medicaid. A 2018 report by the U.S. Government Accountability Office looked at a handful of U.S. states and found that Walmart employs more working adults relying on SNAP than any other company in the study, 1.5 times as many as the other top employee, McDonald's. Kroger also features prominently in these rankings. Here is a table from that Government Accountability Office report focusing on Georgia, where you can see that when this report was done, 3% of all adults on SNAP in Georgia were working for Walmart full-time. Another 0.9% were working for Kroger. So these workers are not earning living wages from their employees. And we can also imagine a situation where, for instance, they use their SNAP benefits at their place of work for the convenience. So Walmart or Kroger, theoretically, could be paying such a low wage that their workers need assistance buying food. And those food benefits are used at those stores themselves, who then benefit financially. Walmart, meanwhile, showers its CEOs and executives with handsome compensation packages. In fiscal year 2025, Walmart's CEO made over $27 million in compensation. This is compared to just under $30,000 for the median worker, a ratio of 930 to 1. This is over twice the ratio of worker to CEO pay at Kroger's, which is about 450 to 1. So if there's one takeaway from my presentation, it is this image here. This issue of consolidation is not unique to the grocery store industry. It is pervasive across all of our food system. A handful of giant corporations, we call them agribusinesses, stand between the 330 million eaters in the US and the 2 million farmers producing our food. When only a few companies are in control of an industry, there is less competition. And less competition can mean poorer service, higher prices, and fewer choices. And this impacts all of us, from the few farmers left standing to those of us who eat. And this is something that we really ground our research on the research team. For instance, our Economic Cost of Food Monopolies series shows how corporate consolidation raises food prices, reduces food availability, and guts farmer income while hollowing out rural communities. Our first in this series started at the supermarkets, which includes a lot of what I've talked about already. And we showed how just a handful of companies produce the majority of food we see in supermarkets, making choice just an illusion. Second one looked at the rise in factory farms and how it's not only driving an environmental crisis in Iowa, but also an economic and social one, as rural communities with more factory farms have less income, more depopulation, and fewer grocery stores. We also looked at the dairy industry and how agricultural policies that focus on exporting markets just really drives the growth in factory farms and reduces farmer income. Most recently, we did an investigation into egg price spikes following the bird flu outbreak. We showed that the recent price spikes that we've seen in the last few years weren't really tied to lower levels of eggs or hens, but to corporate consolidation. So this figure here shows how the US's largest egg producer, Cal-Maine, actually sold more eggs in 2023, the first year of the outbreak, than it did the previous year. company did not experience a single outbreak in its flocks that first year, but it rode the wave of inflated prices, selling its conventional eggs at nearly 3 times the price as it did the previous year. Cal-Maine's profits increased more than 7 times in 2023 compared to 2022 before the outbreak began. We crunched the numbers and found that Cal-Maine made over $1 billion in what we call windfall profits. That is, profits directly related to these inflated egg prices. And while eggs are just one product, consolidation is rampant across the food industry. Every step along the food chain, from the seeds and inputs and machinery that farmers rely on to the slaughterhouses and supermarkets, is in the hands of fewer and fewer corporations. And this impacts the affordability and the availability of food. To put this into perspective, the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, releases monthly food plans where they calculate the average cost of groceries based on household size. There are 4 categories they use, ranging from a thrifty food plan to a liberal food plan. The thrifty food plan is the one that reflects what families on a tight budget can expect to pay. And from December 2019 until August of this year, that food plan rose and increased over 50%. And now costs about $1,000 a month to feed a family of 4. And again, this is on a very tight budget. And this is over double the rate of the overall inflation over the same time period. So clearly, inflation and food profiteering is hitting the most vulnerable families the hardest. I have to look at these figures now and then, especially as another month goes by where we blow through our grocery budget in my house. I always feel guilty, like I'm spending extravagantly, because in my mind, I still think it's reasonable to feed a family of 4 on like $800 a month. But that is clearly no longer the case, even when you are the most savvy shopper on the thriftiest plan. So to close out, as we near the Thanksgiving holiday, this food price inflation is going to have a tangible negative impact on many families' abilities to celebrate. We just looked at the latest available data on Thanksgiving basket, the typical foods you might find at the Thanksgiving table, and that found that from January to September of this year alone, prices for staple Thanksgiving foods increased far above the rate of inflation. Overall inflation went up about 2.2%, but here we can see we can expect to pay more for things like turkey, for sides, and even for desserts. So clearly, this corporate-controlled food system is not serving us. It is making food harder to find, more expensive, all while keeping many workers and farmers at poverty wages. This system is not broken. It is working just as the industries who are calling the shots want it to, driving profits to them. But that doesn't mean that this is inevitable. And my colleague Rebecca will dig more into about what we can do on the policy side to combat these high prices and corporate greed.
Great, there I am. Thank you so much, Amanda. And as Amanda mentioned, my name is Rebecca Wolf. I'm the Senior Food Policy Analyst here at Food and Water Watch. And I'm going to be finishing today's presentation with a review of some of the food policy that has gotten us to this predicament just this year. Unfortunately, as we've been talking about, it's been a tough year. And as we've heard today, there are real attacks on people's most basic needs and protections that have left many of us reeling. So today, much of the food that we eat is from this highly consolidated grocery retail environment that Amanda talked about. It's also from factory farms. We saw in the beginning of the year the bird flu crisis is really emblematic of this problem, and she talked about this. But we saw egg corporation Cal-Maine push prices way higher than their actual growing costs, which led them to $1 billion in windfall profits in a single year. All the while, factory farms, like where Cal-Maine raises their eggs, and other corporations are raising up to 1 million or more chickens in these really crowded conditions, which are just hotbeds for disease. In fact, throughout the country, there are thousands of factory farms that produce vast quantities of waste, pollutants from fecal pathogens, nitrogen, phosphorus, pharmaceuticals, heavy metals. It's no good. And it's really hard to wrap your mind around just how much animal waste is produced on factory farms in the US. It's about 941 billion pounds every year. But all the while, the Trump administration has been slashing the very conservation, food safety, and small farm programs that are the antidote to these problems. They're carrying out their agenda to slash the federal government and deliver on promises to billionaires and big ag corporations. So look, the Trump administration, the Trump campaign, they campaigned on affordability, but so far he's only sending prices and fear higher and higher. The uncertainty and fear around Trump's policies is already destabilizing our very, very fragile agriculture system. So for instance, let's talk about tariffs. They make imports more expensive, which can support US companies and workers by protecting local markets. Coupled with really good domestic growth policy, tariffs can help reshore factories, build food webs, support local economies, and create good family supporting jobs as well as supporting US farmers. They also can enforce good labor and good food safety practices here in the US and also in other countries that we trade with. But tariffs have been a major part of Trump's agenda since he came into office. We've all been seeing that in the news. But he misunderstands the role of tariffs in trade and industrial policy, and he's using them to bully other countries into supporting his immigrant bashing cruelty rather than helping US workers and US farmers. Trump is using them to coerce countries into doing his bidding, and meanwhile, again, farmers and families are feeling the worst consequences of his wheeling and dealing. And you just heard from Amanda that groceries are getting more expensive. Unfortunately, this crisis has been designed by right-wing billionaires in concert with this administration. A tax to hunger programs and a deregulatory agenda has set us on just this accelerated crash course into harder and harder circumstances for people. But we can't lay all the blame at Trump's feet. He has had many a co-conspirator in the architects of Project 2025 and congressional Republicans to slash the federal government and cut programs that millions of people rely on every day. Over the summer, Congress passed and Trump signed into law the Big Ugly Bill. This is that reconciliation legislation that gives massive tax breaks to billionaires, corporations, fossil fuel drillers, all while delivering the biggest cuts to SNAP and Medicaid in American history. And these impacts are just devastating to families. Now, to complicate matters, this Big Ugly Bill came with a set of farm bill policies focused on commodities and crop insurance. But these policies are kind of more of that business as usual, and they don't support the kind of food and agriculture system that we want to see. They increase some spending for some mandatory farm bill programs through this budget reconciliation process, but it was really for the benefit of an elite few. So instead of coming together for a 50-year, we've had this for 50 years, a 50-year bipartisan farm bill process, Republicans decided to choose to pass this Frankenstein farm bill provision in the huge reconciliation package. Then this October, Trump and congressional Republicans drove us headfirst into a government shutdown that paused essential safe food and clean water programs and stopped work and paychecks for hundreds of thousands of civil servants who serve this country and keep it running. They also left millions of people without food benefits in early November. So after a long year of cutbacks, slashes, clawbacks, we saw just how devastating a government shutdown can be. But how did we get here? Well, Trump and Republican leadership refused to negotiate and would only accept their partisan resolution bullying their opposition. In fact, the Trump administration attempted to fire about 4,200 federal employees across different federal agencies that are extremely important, like Health and Human Services and the Environmental Protection Agency. The good news here is that a federal judge actually denied these firings, entering a temporary restraining order against the Trump administration. This was the longest government shutdown in history at 43 days, topping a record that the Trump administration previously set at 35 days. So it's clear that this administration is using low-income Americans as pawns in his political game. Trump's shutdown doubled down on this punishment and confusion for families across the country, and what resulted from October through mid-November was again a game of political chess that left families, food pantries, and different states reeling. We have about 1 in 4 children and 1 in 8 adults that were left at risk of increased hunger because of this meddling. So a little specifics on these programs. When the shutdown happened, we got to work pushing back. This map displays Food and Water Watch research on the threat of hunger from two different programs. So this one is the WIC program, the Women, Infant, and Children program, and it's what Krissy talked about at the top of the call. Using US Census data and USDA data, which is the Department of Agriculture, we analyzed just how many children under the age of 5 utilize this program. So this map shows the number of children on WIC in the US, totaling about 1 in 4 young children nationwide, 3 in 4 children in Puerto Rico, and many states have about 20 to 30% of children in the state that utilize this program. It's very important. Now, all of these folks are still at risk of losing benefits as the administration continues to attack these types of programs. This wasn't the only nutrition program under threat, especially during the shutdown, though. SNAP was also significantly impacted. So SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, again, a fundamental program for millions of Americans, has been under attack. During the shutdown, the Trump administration used SNAP recipients as a political pawn once again, making them choose between meals, medicine, rent, food, all while the USDA could have just funded the program. But let's be really, really clear about this, because they started jockeying with these benefits well before this shutdown in the fall. Before the Trump administration, the federal government has fully funded SNAP benefits. Since the passage of Trump's Big Ugly Bill, states are now on the hook for a portion of benefits. But in the shutdown, states had to try to pay for the full benefits when the USDA refused. It was pandemonium. 1 minute, states were receiving no SNAP funding. Then, because of multiple lawsuits, the USDA was sending partial funding. Then the USDA was sending full benefits, and then they ripped it away again. So the changes in USDA messaging caused states to issue full payments, which is great. Then the USDA threatened those states by withholding future funding because they released funding. So again, we've seen just a ton of back and forth from this administration on punishing states and punishing hungry people. We saw a big win here, though. In Massachusetts, just last Wednesday, a judge ruled that the USDA cannot retaliate against states who issued full benefits or incorrect benefits during the shutdown. And here's what I really want to drive home about this. SNAP recipients, on average, it's about $187 a month per person, about $6 a day. It's not a lot. And as we saw, those numbers from Amanda, groceries are incredibly expensive. Nearly 40% of recipients are children, 20% are elderly, and about 10% are disabled adults. Hunger and poverty are just driven by economic inequalities and systematic discrimination, and we are just seeing that crush really live right now. Nutrition programs like SNAP and like WIC help lift Americans out of poverty, reduce hunger, and reduce food insecurity. So it's absolutely vital that SNAP and WIC stay funded and they stay whole as we're in this kind of grocery Goliath economy that Amanda talked about. So the shutdown ended last week when Senate Democrats struck a deal, one that did not include really, really important healthcare subsidies or rescission protections. And by the way, rescission, we're talking about it now in the policy world. It's just that technical term for how Trump gutted PBS's budget this year. Basically, it's a tool that has been used to claw back or undo congressionally approved funding. So the compromise contain these 3 big pieces: a continuing resolution or an extension, keeping the government open until January 30th, a 1-year spending bill for the Food and Drug Administration and the Agriculture Department, again, the ones who didn't want to pay for SNAP benefits, and then an extension on the Farm Bill. Once again, we've been seeing an extension on the Farm Bill. We're just not getting legislators together to actually support people, but they did have this huge compromise. So we saw a ton of changes. I'm not going to lie to you, really big mixed bag of what's going on Capitol Hill. We saw some changes in conservation programs, specifically removing payment limits for the EQIP program and the Conservation Stewardship Program. And those are 2 programs that are really fundamental in helping preserve farmland instead of overplanting corn and soy, for example, and for adding necessary but expensive projects to sustainable farms. So think fencing to keep the cows out of the stream. These changes, unfortunately, to those programs could lead to more industrial farms taking on more conservation dollars. So we didn't want to see that. We saw cuts in funding for another conservation program that encourages farmers to rent or sell land to beginning veteran, socially disadvantaged ranchers. So again, not good. On a positive note, the bill, this package deal, did fully fund SNAP and WIC programs and refilled the contingency fund to make sure that they stay funded through the year. The spending bill gave again, that contingency fund is essential for fruits and vegetable benefits to ensure that children, new parents, and expecting mothers don't go hungry. But the USDA is currently planning more ways to prevent people from using these imperative programs, needlessly making them re-register their eligibility, for example. So let's step back. One thing that has been extremely clear this year, Trump and congressional Republicans have been working to enact their agenda of slashing the federal government, federal programs, and enacting really cruel policy. But we have seen a big groundswell of opposition to him from organizers across the country, No Kings events, to all of our volunteers that have been phone banking, keeping terrible provisions out of some of this moving legislation. Now, it's been a really tough year, but you heard from really inspiring speakers today, and when times get really tough like this at Food and Water Watch, we really put our heads together to work to build strategic pressure points and solidarity across our movements. So, for example, earlier this year, Trump's big ugly bill took aim at school meals to cut the program. We fought back, and by the end of April, the bill did not include any cuts to the National School Lunch Program, which feeds 20 million children nationwide to prevent hunger where they learn. This is the kind of work that we can continue to do together, even when it's pretty tough. So we're poised for the next round and the next fight. Here's what we're doing and what's coming up. Continue to stand in solidarity with other groups, organizing across these different pieces of the food movement. Put pressure on specific Congress members to fight for decent, basic food policy and stop the slash of federal programs. And despite all this tough environment, keep pushing for what we truly need: an end to corporate capture and an end to these bullies and bad guys taking away decent food policies and programs. And this is where I have some really good news for you before we head to questions. A little bit of an inside scoop. So we are working on a bill, one of our Senate allies in Congress, to halt new mergers on food and agribusiness corporations. Very exciting. These huge companies wield so much power, especially when it comes to the Trump administration's abysmal deregulatory and pro-big business agenda. So this legislation is the kind of policy we know we need, and frankly, that's extremely popular in the different communities and places where we organize. This legislation would halt new mergers above a certain size, allow the Department of Justice to look back at past mergers and determine if they're too big, and then ultimately help break up some of this undue power in our food system. The bill's not introduced yet, but I wanted to share that despite this really, really challenging administration, we're still scheming and dreaming and organizing and fighting back with all of you. So thank you for being here, and we'll drop this link in the chat and make sure you know firsthand when it's introduced. And I'll pass it back to Jeanine to get us started.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you, Amanda, as well. Thank you both for these really important overviews. We're bringing back Amanda onto the screen here, and we have reserved the rest of our time for Q&A. So thank you, everyone who has put questions in the Q&A. Again, if you have questions for Rebecca or Amanda, please put those in the Q&A box, and we'll get started here. So let's see, we've got some questions coming in. A lot of questions really have to do with, like, one person saying, like, how does Trump get away with not honoring his oath of office and upholding the Constitution? I know that's a bigger question than this specifically, but I feel like it does play a part. Like, how can we predict what is going to happen if he's not following the rules?
You know, Jeanine, that's one of the reasons that this rescission protection was really, really important, and something that we're continuing to push for with our federal spending bills, is because that is the tool that he's been utilizing to take back things that have been approved by Congress that should be standing as law. So that's one of the places where we're continuing to push on, for example, Senate Democrats to hold the line there and make sure that he's not allowed to get away with this. So it takes all of us who are organizing and watching this process and telling the truth, and also pressuring our elected leaders like Senate Democrats who need to be holding that line.
Yeah, thank you. And you talked a little bit about how tariffs are maybe being misused, but how could the tariffs be used to support farmers in the US?
Sure. And Amanda, I'll also let you, if you want to talk a little bit about grain trading and some of the exciting things that we have coming up. But they're a tool, and just like any tool, they need to be used in a way that then builds up the economies that we want to see built up. So in the case that Amanda and I have been making today, our local grocers. And they make imports more expensive, and so we can utilize them again to then protect U.S. In this case grocers from being undercut by cheap imports. So we saw, for example, we saw tariffs unnecessary on coffee and bananas, and that recently rolled back from the administration because we do not have the ability to produce coffee and bananas in the US. So that was a really good example of a misuse of a tariff, just making things more expensive for American consumers as opposed to protecting a banana or coffee business here, those things that we don't have. So that's a really good example of a recent misuse and undoing by the administration, realizing that that was a very unpopular, especially thing to do.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add that, this problem with our food system didn't start in the Trump administration. We've seen a lot of really terrible and very malicious gutting of, we mentioned on this call on people's benefits and stuff, but overall, our food system has been designed by corporations to serve corporations for a very long time. And so these problems didn't start with Trump and are not going to go away just when the Trump administration, transitions to a new administration. And so I think we really need to also kind of focus on the bigger picture. What have we done as a society, as a country, to allow a handful of companies to amass so much power that they have such undue influence over the policies of our food system? And I think that's the fight that we're in as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I do have a number of questions here about that bigger picture food system. One of the questions is, are startup soil-based organic farms still eligible for federal funding? And I don't know if you can speak to that, but are there specific things like that that are being affected by this?
Yeah, there have been a ton of those types of programs that have been affected by, in particular, the Big Ugly Bill, the reconciliation package. And then as we're paying attention to, I mentioned the Farm Bill process we're in, so I'll do a quick step back. We've had 50 years of bipartisan, we passed this huge piece of legislation that funds all these different programs that support farming. Unfortunately, the original Farm Bill was kind of this New Deal era style legislation that was meant to move us out of the Dust Bowl, which is this environmental crisis because we had overplanted, and then actually move us toward a more sustainable, fair, and conservation-minded food economy, farm economy. We saw corporations really, as they amass power, chip away at this type of social program that we had. And so now what we have is a very pro-corporate farm bill, but even that has broken down. So the Big Ugly Bill had pieces of the farm bill, and now we saw with the Senate deal that recently passed to open the government, we also saw some pieces of farm bill type of legislation. This is unprecedented. We have never seen this before. It's been quite a breakdown in food and farm policy. And with that, we've seen attacks of these types of programs. So the one that is specifically mentioned, I'm not sure. We always have to go check the specifics and make sure because there's a lot of jockeying around. But in general, we've seen an attack on the types of conservation and organic programs that we want to see funded. And so that is something we're keeping a very close eye on. And again, pushing our Senate Democrats to be champions on.
Oh, thank you. And follow up in terms of consumer choice, does buying organic help farmers or help the system?
I mean, I think it is a way to, say that you support certain farming practices, right? And organic being really, when it comes to a label that you see on food, one of the most best labels that we have that does actually have, a lot of policies and standards behind them. And so, when you're buying organic, that you're buying something that doesn't use synthetic pesticides. If you're buying organic dairy, the cows have to spend a certain amount of time on the field. And so, yes, I mean, it is a way to definitely support those systems that really match up with your values. But as we like to say at Food and Water Watch, it's not enough to vote with our forks, that we also need to vote with our votes. We need to pressure our leaders to stand up to corporations as well, because we're not going to fix the system by our personal, food choices alone. It takes much more than that.
Thank you. Amanda, I think this question is for you. Is the biggest problem for independent grocery stores not being able to buy foodstuffs at the scale and therefore price of, say, Walmart?
It's certainly one of the biggest ones. And again, one of the ways that Walmart was able to rise to power by undercutting its competitors. And even today, oftentimes still gets sweetheart deals. So, they might be able to sell, a bag of apples at their shelves for less than what a corner grocery store can even purchase them for, and which makes, competing with them impossible. But that doesn't mean that those low prices necessarily stay. Walmart has been known to raise prices once they've already beaten out their competitors. And not to mention that they are being really extractive in the economy. The fact that they are able to also provide lower prices because they don't pay their workers a living wage is another part of it as well. And again, that, has reverberant impacts on the economy as a whole. So certainly that is definitely one of the things that smaller stores are competing with. And it's not just Walmart, it's, the Krogers and the Safeways and the other big corporations that are really dominating our food system.
I just want to add to that, Amanda, because it's we're talking about it at the grocery retail level, but as I mentioned, the food and agribusiness merger moratorium type bill that we're looking at is looking at all the parts of the food system. So we're really experiencing at the grocer level, but there's also the concentration that is now happening at the meat packers, and it's also happening with all of the different parts of our food system. And so there also becomes I'm not a supply expert on this, but there also becomes an issue with Kraft will only sell you this whole carton, and so you have to take it. And so small grocers are also dealing with consolidation from where they're buying and the buying power being tough there too. So that's why we need to see this merger moratorium across all food and agribusiness entities, and also why we at Food and Water Watch really focus and push on this consolidation angle, because power is such an enveloped part of this whole story that we've been telling today.
Yeah, and I'll add that when we think about corporate consolidation, we a lot of times think of what we call like a horizontal merger. So a company buying out a similar company. So like I showed with the example with Kroger buying out other companies that sell groceries as well. But there's also something called vertical integration, vertical mergers. So buying different parts of the production chain. So you have, corporations like Walmart and Kroger that are getting into like producing their own beef and their own milk. And so buying different stuffs along that supply chain as well. So they can just be its own supplier. So it can get even more wealth out of that system as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I know we have more questions than we'll get to, but there are a number of questions about benefits. And I'm going to kind of combine these two into one question. Someone's asking how many people receiving SNAP benefits were impacted by the Big Ugly Bill? And then also, Rebecca, will SNAP be cut again if the government shuts down at the end of January?
Yeah, those are great questions. So the Big Ugly Bill, there were about 2 million people that were impacted by cuts there. And that 2 million is from a couple different ways that this was enacted. One, I mentioned states being required to pay part in part, and that is just necessarily going to shrink the amount of people they're able to serve. And then two, added work requirements. So just more and more requirements on top of, again, we're talking like $6, $187 a month, 6 a day. So really small, and we know how expensive, what can you get for $6 for a meal? It's really, really tough there. So that's generally what we saw from the Big Ugly Bill impacts. And then, yes, if there's another shutdown, or I mentioned Project 2025, part of their agenda has been to slash the federal government and SNAP benefits in particular. And so those are two things that we're going to be very vigilant on, because they're, again, part of this whole impact on our food system and how people are able to access groceries.
Yeah, thank you. We're about at time, so I want to just ask one last question that I welcome you both to answer. But there are questions about what we can do, and I know that we shared in the chat this link that you can sign this moratorium. But what do you think in terms of like naming the profiteers and pushing legislators for advocating for safer food, and what kind of actions can we as individuals do in this moment?
Sure.
I can start. Yeah. In terms of like naming the profiteers, I think that's a big thing here, because kind of pulling back the veil and the story that the food industry likes to say, like, oh, we have rising costs, that's why food costs more. And then be able to show like the fact that their revenue and their profits are rising and their CEOs are making more money. And I think really kind of drawing attention to that, really, it's hard not to be angry. It's hard to find somebody who's not angry and upset about that. So kind of raising those stories, helping to shift the public narrative. And I think we all have a play in that, in the way we talk about this, the things that we share on our social media with our friends, and just to sort of, kind of, again, try to, like, as much as we can, influence that public narrative so that we can really see what's going on.
Yeah, and I'll add, join that petition, but also at Food and Water Watch, we have a food action team, and we just have a ton of fun over there talking about these issues, but then also being really strategic about when we get that phone banking going and jump on pressuring certain targets who are going to make certain decisions. So I mentioned that National School Lunch Program that received full funding, and then also from this big Senate deal, we're worried about a bad piece of legislation making its way on there. Did a phone bank, have been really building pressure there, and it did not make it into that piece of legislation, which we were pretty sure it was going to otherwise. So we are making a real impact with our volunteer program and being really strategic when things feel overwhelming and daunting. So I really encourage you to join that team and be a part of the work that we're doing there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Amanda and Rebecca, for sharing your research and your policy work with us today. And to everyone on the call, thank you for your great questions. We will be sending out all of the resources that we shared today in an email tomorrow, along with a recording of this webinar. So thank you everyone for being here, for asking your questions. Please join me in thanking Krissy, Sudeshna, and Amanda and Rebecca for taking the time to talk to us today and for sharing their stories and their work with us. As everyone here has said, food policy and food access is an issue that touches each and every one of us in different ways. And I know it's an issue that we all care deeply about. If you'd like to increase the impact that we can have on this important issue, please consider making a donation today. Your gift will go a long way to help us continue this important work. And as I said before, we don't take any corporate funding, so we are not beholden to any special interests other than the health of our communities and our planet. Our support comes from people like you, so thank you so much for your generosity. And if you'd like to learn more about our work, you can register right now for our next 2 Livable Future Live events. Our December discussion will feature stories of building community and resistance with our frontline volunteers. And our January Livable Future Live will be an author talk featuring Food and Water Watch founder and executive director Winona Howder's Book of the Year. I hope you'll join me for both events. And lastly, please consider taking this short survey that will pop up on your screen in a minute. I would love to know what you thought of this event, how we can make it even better, and what kind of speakers and topics you'd like to hear about and from in the future. I really appreciate your feedback. And as a bonus this month, I'll be sending out a free Food and Water Watch bottle to 10 of you who fill out this survey today. Thank you again for joining us, and please watch your email inboxes. I'll be sending out a recording of this event tomorrow. Take care and see you next time.